Hey guys, Wendy here. This is a re-recording of the Switcheroo with narration. The Switcheroo was the procedure by which our Homeowners Association President Mark Hickson, who is also an Oakland County Sheriff's Deputy, worked around what he knew would be a failing assessment. The Switcheroo, why we don't get to vote on these things. Version 2.0 narrated. How we got here. To answer the question, why don't we get to vote on these things, requires taking a brief stroll back in time to 2018. That is when the board first pulled off their switcheroo. That was when they replaced the assessment procedure with the annual dues increase and the annual budget procedure. They did this because they knew they would not get a 66% in favor vote when counting one vote from each lot. And they wanted to do what they wanted to do, which was make these permanent changes they knew that 66% of residents did not want. And approving a budget only requires 51% of in-person voters, bodies, to approve a meeting and to pass. Residents were never put on notice that a nondescript budget vote would be so consequential. Plus, they trusted the board when they described the dues in the ballot as for maintenance. That is how their bylaws, their broken bylaws, led to powerless residents. Let's detail their switcheroo a bit. All of these documents I've cited here can be viewed in whole by visiting hawthornhillstransparency.org. Any new construction is a special assessment. Section 4.02, Assessments. Assessments can change the character of homes, making them different from what made the buyer want to buy it in the first place. That is why assessments require procedural steps that ensure residents get to control whether or not each and every assessment takes place. The procedural steps for an assessment are stricter than the procedural steps for changing the budget. It requires more people to vote yes for it. President Hickson knew he would not be able to get 66% of residents to vote for his project as an assessment, so instead he increased the dues and snuck the project into line items in the budget. The email where he says that is shown later in this video. By doing so, he did precisely the thing our bylaws say not to do. Section 4.02, Assessments, items of expenditure which are not general and reoccurring in nature, shall not be included in the annual budget, but rather deemed to be items of special assessment. It is as though the bylaw authors saw that there would be a temptation to slip failed assessments into the budget to get them done anyway, so the authors went out of their way to guard against exactly that. Compared with an assessment approval rate of 66% of all lots, an approval budget only requires an approval rate of 51% of residents present in the room when the vote is taken. Let's compare the other requirements. Here I have a little chart of the assessment 4.02 requirements. They are 66 2/3% of lots voting, which is 237 votes, voting yes on paper ballots. The ballot must clearly state the assessment project. The ballot must state the total cost. The ballot must state the per member cost, and the ballot must state financing terms. The requirements for annual dues and annual budget, which is 4.01 and 9.01, require 51% of those attending the meeting for which there was not notice to vote yes. They shall include and recite anticipated general and recurring costs only for the year ahead. It should be per lot, amount determined by dividing the annual recurring costs and general costs by 356, because we have 356 lots, and a copy of the annual budget should be given to all residents 10 days at a minimum ahead of the annual meeting. Hickson did not even properly execute the steps required for the dues to be increased either. And here I show a chart of what has been met. 3 out of the 4 assessment requirements failed. They only met 1. And 3 out of the 4 annual dues and annual budget requirements were failed. They only met 1 of those. So they only met 1 requirement of each, but still did it. Hickson continues to rely on this 2018 ill-gotten permission slip to spend our dues unabated to do whatever he wants. He only needed to raise the dues this one time to fund the second step of his switcheroo every year thereafter. Last year it was the lights. Before that, it was new and additional black pole street signs. This year, it's privacy, stripping paths, park benches, more signs, gazebo, boardwalk, 8 more major trees removed, a playground, going from 4 to 9 entrance signs, and more. He seems to be getting bolder and doesn't even seem to mind being caught saying blatantly contradicting things. If you don't believe me, please go watch the timeline of path documents also on this channel. It's understandable if you haven't given this much attention because none of the projects have changed the character of your property. But do you want to gamble on it being so lucky again next year or the year after that? One wonders why he blended the requirements of an assessment with the requirements of an annual dues increase justified by a higher annual budget if he never thought it should have been an assessment. Here is the actual descriptive language of the paper ballot that residents received. The current dues of the association are $100 and have been so since 2000. Board wishes to bring about improvements. Has barely been able to maintain the status quo with the current allocated budget. We maintain and improve our homes. We facilitate community improvements. And then you have to check a box, I am in favor or against the annual dues increase. The board argues everyone knew the ballot was for the specific projects of lights, paths, and whatever else is listed on their brainstormed list of things of all different categories. The board says everyone knew. The board says they sent emails ahead of the ballot, but even if they did, they at best only even had 51% of the lot's emails addresses. The board says they sent a paper letter separately and after this ballot, hold on, I can't see, saying it was for a list of ideas and listing them and pleading for the ballot to be returned. I think the obvious question is, if they were so sure that everyone knew their ballot was for funding their new construction ideas, why didn't the ballot just say it? I'm back. Why didn't they just put it on the ballot? Their argument is everyone knew. They sent an email ahead of it and a letter after it. Why not put it on the ballot? Is there any answer that explains this glaring omission paired with their misleading status quo and maintenance wording other than they feared that if they stated that they were increasing the dues to fund their construction ideas, they'd not even get 51% approval? People that were openly against the construction projects voted for the dues increase, trusting the board when they clearly wrote on the ballots that this was an increase in dues because the cost... I'm so sorry. I had to cough. Residents trusted the board when they clearly wrote on the ballot that this was for an increase in dues because the cost of maintenance had risen since the year 2000. There should have been an option for a lower increase, for example, of going from $100 to $175. Instead, residents were only given the single choice of keeping it too low at $100 or going up 250% to $350. The ballot also may not have said it was for their list of ideas because a list of ideas is not an actionable, developed plan ready for a vote to be put to residents on whether or not to fund, especially not to a tune of $124,600 annually, indefinitely. And this email exchange with Hickson sheds light on his mindset when he should have done an assessment but ran it through as a dues increase justified by an annual budget instead. So there is the actual resident's email to Hickson, who's trying to stop Hickson from what looks like changing the rules or breaking the rules. And I've got it highlighted here if you want to look at it and summed up in the next page. The resident's email boiled down is neither percentage reaches 66% that he was projecting to get. The appearance is that it was likely that voted on as an assessment and failed, and that is what caused the board to move in to include capital improvements into their domain for the first time in 20 years. Or the board anticipated it would not pass, perhaps without even having a formal vote. The board knew a greater than 50% vote instead of a 66% vote was required for a budget. It just doesn't pass the smell test. This resident is telling Hickson, you need to stop what you're doing. It's going to smell like rotten to a court if you come in with this. Hickson's response is here. You can look at the slide if you want. It's his actual words. Boiled down, it's, I agree, that's why we didn't go to court. The chance we may lose. Solution is going to be a very small bylaw that will require 51% of people at a special meeting, which I don't think will be hard to get. Here's the resident's reply. She's saying, no, please stop, don't do it. I'm afraid any action or changes in bylaws made immediately in time subsequent to the failure of it to pass at 66% that would allow the lights to take place would appear to a court as another workaround step. I think the original bylaws were contemplating big capital projects exactly like this streetlights when they required a passage of 66%. I'm sorry. Maybe efforts would be better spent getting a passage rate of 66%. Then the plaintiff or others wouldn't have a leg to stand on. So basically the resident is saying, stop trying to change the laws, spend that energy trying to get a 66% pass rate. The resident later discovered Hickson's response itself was misleading. He spoke about the change as though it was something he was thinking about doing in the future, when he'd actually already slipped the lights in as a line item capital improvement over a year earlier at the annual meeting. Hickson also misled by saying he'd have a special meeting for this. This would have raised attention. He already had it voted on at an annual meeting. There was no special meeting called for this. That switcheroo vote that overcame what would have been a failing assessment vote for a project for 1 year, and which now falsely empowers the board to spend as much of our dues every year or however they choose, without ever needing to seek a vote on any certain project, was only described on the meeting agenda as resident input that would require a vote. Under new business. 6 words. And it was placed as the 3rd item down on the 2nd page. There it is. If you want to look, here's a picture of how small it is and how nondescriptive. If this was sent to all residents at all, they'd said that email is the only communication means that they would use. And at best, at this time, the board had only an estimated 51% of all lots in their email list. On those meeting minutes, the only time the word vote appears is in those meeting minutes was in regards to votings for re-electing the board. This is the only other vote that took place at the meeting. Here's what that single hugely consequential and resident disempowering vote is documented. 2019 budget proposal and approval. Excuse me, 2019 budget proposal and approval. In addition to mischaracterizing assessments as maintenance, another way the annual dues budget switcheroo broke the rules is that the amount of annual dues is supposed to come from the annual cost of maintenance divided by the number of lots, which is 356. The cost in the budget for 2019, even with the unjustly added streetlights as a line item capital improvement, did not reach as high as $124,600, which is what 350 per resident comes to annual. 350 times 356. So they were giving themselves extra money. There is a provision for exceptions for annual dues, but that was not met. The in-writing override is for the amount only and does not give permission to miscategorize assessments into maintenance. And it would need to be in writing by the same 51% of in-person voters at the meeting where the vote was held. There is zero connection to the paper ballots purposed for assessments that require to be mailed to each lot and an assessment vote that passes at 66 2/3%. Nothing. So they didn't meet the requirements of their alternative / switcheroo path either. Here's the checklist, and you see here 4 out of 5 assessment requirements were failed, and 3 out of 4 annual dues / annual budget requirements were not completed. It would appear they basically made up their own rules, which is something we see a lot here with our leader. Making up rules. I guess people think it's okay, or they just don't know the rules. I don't know. Picking some aspects of each. There is some evidence that has continued in other ways in other areas. Since I did this slideshow, I've discovered lots of places where our president, Mark Hickson, who is also an Oakland County Sheriff's deputy, makes up rules with no apologies. Many people tried to help Hickson understand how to follow the rules well before a resident paid a lawyer to send him a letter that said the same thing. Many, many documented cases of residents trying to get Hickson to follow the rules. Here's one of those examples. So here's a resident's email. You can look at it. It's the actual email. I've redacted his email address and name for privacy. And there's page 2 of it. I want you to be able to see. There it is. And let me go back here. So basically he's saying prior to implementing the lights, the bylaws need to be followed. He states Article 4 Dues and assessment section 4.01, which is the assessment statute. Assessment shall not be included in the annual budget of the association, but rather shall be deemed items of special assessment. Recognizing that the recent installation of new street sign posts should have followed the process requirements but did not, it is essential that consideration of streetlights not proceed until the project has met the requirements of the bylaws. So this resident seems to be on to Hickson way before a lot of us other ones are. He's saying, hey, you didn't follow the bylaws rules to install the street posts, the street sign posts, and now you're doing it on the lights. You have to stop this. Hickson's response: thank you for your thoughts. Our plan is to move forward with the lights after recommendations from Capital Improvements Committee. Don't understand why this is such an issue for you. This will only improve our neighborhood. It will increase the safety at all. Boy, there's a lot of things to say about this email. First of all, our plan is to move forward with the lights after recommendations from the Capital Improvements Committee. There's the sleight of hand again. Mark knows what the rule is. He's literally been told it. If he didn't know it before, that's kind of scary, but I think he did. If not, it's covered because this resident literally typed it out for him. Hickson, in the face of this, basically says no thanks, or something that could be abbreviated as FU, and we're going to break the rules. Despite the fact that the bylaw here says this, we're going to move forward with the lights after the recommendation from the Capital Improvements Committee. If you watched my sleight of hand video, this is an example where Hickson makes up something that sounds sort of legal, and people go along with it. They trust him. He's a police officer, right? Okay. Capital Improvements Committee is not the law. But here, Hickson has written he's going to move forward after the recommendations from the Capital Improvements Committee. After this, we learn that the survey, following the negative survey, not the positive survey, it was negative. Following the negative survey, the lighting committee disbanded. Okay, so the survey didn't turn out the way Hickson wanted it to. He was relying ahead of time of that coming back positive and relying on the excuse of it, capital improvements. Again, the lighting committee disbanded following the overwhelmingly negative response to the lighting survey, which was also extremely restricted. Even so, he didn't get the result he wanted, so he just ignored it. He put the lights in anyway. Please see the July 2020 survey results on my website, hawthornhillstransparency.org. I'll try to make another video. There's a lot of videos I need to make to debunk all of the things that have been said that aren't true. Anyway, here's more of Hickson's response. Can tell you I have no interest in going back and forth with emails indicating what the bylaws say and what they don't say. He's telling the resident, I don't care what the bylaws say. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And then he puts forth his switcheroo. The budget was voted upon and approved by the members that were at the open meeting. Again, that's his made-up sleight of hand Hickson law that isn't the actual law. And also, no reference to lights was found anywhere in the 2018. I've got to move my, hold on, I got to pause for a second. In the 2019 agenda or minutes, which is when it was slipped into the annual budget under capital improvements and voted on. So no reference to lights is found in it. Okay, so even Mark's misrepresentation that makes it sound a little better is still not true. Okay, he's not just misrepresenting it. He's still misrepresenting it to be better than it is. The light survey came back negative and it wasn't in the agenda or minutes. Okay, I'll try to put the camera back on. No notice was given to residents that the lighting assessment was slipped into the budget under capital improvements and that they needed to show up at the meeting to vote against the annual operational budget to stop them. Hickson said it himself. I have no interest in going back and forth with the emails indicating what the bylaws say and what they don't. Why would he care? He just gets to make up the rules. It doesn't matter. The bylaws are very clear. The residents should not feel that they have to email board members to explain to them the rules they are breaking. It's understandable that a resident would think the president must just not know the rule. Residents also shouldn't be the subject of anger for expecting the rules to be followed. And that happens a lot here. It's understandable that a resident would think the president just must not know the rule. The resident should be blamed for trying to help. Here's the rule again. Section 4.02, assessments, items of expenditure which are not general and reoccurring in nature shall not be included in the annual budget, but rather deemed to be items of special assessment. They don't just say don't include it in the budget. They give special orders. It should be an item of special assessment. Earlier in the chain, in that email chain, we see this response from the secretary. She's scolding him for not being at the meeting. It's too bad you didn't make it to the annual meeting where much of this was discussed. When the dues increase was implemented, a survey was done as to what residents would want to do first, second, third, etc. Far and away, street signs and lights were the top two items. The lights will go on all corners and down long stretches of road. The project is done in conjunction with the provider and is financed with them. So it's not clear if the secretary was misled into believing there was a survey, and if there was, it was positive, and if there was and it was positive, then it's okay to break the bylaws because the president is a law enforcement officer, and so when he makes up new rules, it's okay. I don't know what's the mindset of these people. I will say, if everyone was so confident residents all wanted the lights, why didn't any of these projects go through a legal assessment vote? If everyone was so sure they wanted them, it would have passed with 66%. The angry attempts to shame residents for not attending meetings in response to their asking why the rules aren't being followed simply must stop. No resident shaming. You shouldn't make residents jump through hoops to know what's going on, and it's false to represent that if a resident was at a meeting, they could stop something that they didn't even know was happening. Then you should have gone to a meeting is not an answer to why the rules keep being broken. It's not our responsibility to babysit the board members into following the rules. It wouldn't work anyway because they can break the rules outside of a meeting, and they have done so. This has been repeated by the board and other residents assisting in the execution of the initial and now annual repeating switcheroo. It's not clear whether they are aware they are acting outside of the rules and breaking the rules themselves too when they act to enable the execution of it. Residents should not have on their shoulders that they must go to meetings or it's their fault for not stopping the board in the meetings for breaking the rules. So here's a list of all the things in this video which I've cited, which are available in full for your own review. I don't expect you to take my word from it. I want you to look it up. It's the truth, and I want you to see it for yourself with your own eyes. The bylaws, 4.02 assessments, 4.01 annual dues, 9.01 annual budget, actual ballot. There's a photo there of the actual ballot. You can see for yourself how it's only described as maintenance. You can see the email chain there where Hickson details his workaround with the knowledge he will not get a 66 2/3 pass rate. You can see the 2019 meeting agenda, which is mistitled meeting minutes. You can see the 2019 meeting minutes, and you can see the email chain where the resident emails Hickson about the need to follow the bylaws, and Hickson states he has no interest in doing so. Transparency and rule following that we can all trust is the only path back to peace for our neighborhood. We don't have that now. And we're not going to get it with the present leadership. We're just not, because we're not going to get the rules followed. Shaming him into following the rules doesn't work. He boldly does it. He boldly breaks the rules. Thanks for watching, and catch you soon.